Hi, everybody. This is Theresa, and I'm just doing a voiceover on some of the procedure that I'm doing in this video. As you can see, I am working on a relatively large, I guess you'd call it a contemporary oceanscape in kind of a atmospheric style. I work on these big tables with rolling casters, which are really handy. And at this point in the process, I've got about probably 8 layers on the piece already. And what I'm doing is just kind of going along and getting a relatively smooth surface, which then sets me up to do a shellac burn application here shortly, which you'll see. And I love working about this scale. I would say that's about 60 inches. And the reason I love it is you can really open up a piece. You can be a bit more somatic and feeling what you're doing. I usually fuse, and then I'll even run my hands over it to see which areas I need to touch and touch again with the flame. I use different types of blow torches. This is your typical plumber's torch, and you can find those at any hardware store. And then I use the small Iwatani in the foreground, and it runs, in my opinion, a little bit more intensely and a little hotter. So, a couple other things that I just want to touch on is, make sure that what you're creating really lights you up. And I think that's the main premise I want to impart to everybody. There is no pursuit of perfection in any of these works. Scraping is a big part of what I do on any given piece. I like to remind people with encaustic art that if you're not scraping by about 5 or 6 layers, then you're probably wanting to switch it up and do some of that. That's what makes it interesting. It reveals the subtext below. And so I'm doing that in this piece, and then I'll go back to, surface applications. I usually have a big vat, as you can see in the foreground, of encaustic medium, and it's clear. And I get that generally from RF paints. It's pre-mixed with Damar resin in it. So that's kind of my overall setup. I like to have everything close by. I have that thin piece of wood that I rest everything on the surface at a point, and then I'll switch it, and move it to a table. So as we're leading up to the shellac burn demo, and it's a brief demo here, but I'll show you exactly how I mix it. I like a couple different types of shellac. I buy them in a big can. It's a Zinsser brand. It's available at any of the US hardware stores. And I buy both the clear and the amber, and I use them for different things. The clear you can get a better white with when you add dry pigments, and the amber is really great for some of the more earth toned and black colors. So here I am, I'm using a catch in my left hand, which catches any of the excess drips. And I do that quite a bit when I'm working on a larger piece. And then eventually you can just put that on a hot plate and melt it down and pour the wax into one of your cans for added volume for color. So here's a close up. I always use wood handled chip brushes. Relatively natural bristles so that they're not melting in the heat. So this is just sort of a little bit of background for you and a close-up on how I work in studio. And I was honored to one year be asked to do some of these demos for the Painting with Fire Circle. And, I really just sort of go to the beat of my own drum within studio. I'm trying new things. I'm doing things that are tried and true. And I think for any of you who are interested in the process, it's just kind of great to show you close ups. And, doing the rhythmic layers is an important meditative part of what I do. So we'll be moving forward here into the shellac demo very shortly. It's always kind of iffy to be moving big vats of wax around. It's always good to cover your floors too. You don't want to be too precious with your floors, or you won't take chances or risks or things of that nature. I like to keep the brushes fully loaded with encaustic medium, and I go across one direction, usually at an angle, as you can see, and that helps everything just really get good coverage for the most part. A lot of people ask me how I get a true white. I use RF paints, pre-mixed in caustic medium, and then I add titanium white dry pigments, and that's how I get the best white in general. So once I put about that much medium on the surface, I'll go back to fusing, and then we'll move on to mixing the shellac. You'll see here shortly a big can of the Zinsser brand. So here it is. That's the clear, it looks like, and I stir everything usually, as a general rule, 20 to 30 times. 30 is a good ratio. The dry pigments are in the bottle on the left. I like Gamblin brand the best. Dixie cups are handy, and I'll fill a Dixie cup about half full, and then I'll put in about 2 full teaspoons of that dark color, and then I'll mix that up pretty well so all of the pigment, powdered pigment, gets dispersed. And there's different ways to do this, but excuse me, none of them are very tidy or elegant. I've got several cups in this demo just because I'm mixing different colors. I'll have some dark and then some whites. And then I take a sponge brush, again, any hardware store. It's your basic sponge painter's brush for edging, and I apply that once it's been well stirred. And then I like to let it sit on the surface of the encaustic. I go straight over encaustic, not anything else, not over oils or cold wax or shellac spray or anything. And I like to let it sit somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes. And then I hit it with the flame barely on, kind of a light whisper, and that really opens up the cells in that gorgeous webbing pattern that everybody loves so much. Just adding a little bit of the white, and that's the Gamblin, I think, right there. Titanium or titanium dioxide. It's a really nice product. All right, we are about to start applying it to the same piece of art. So what's interesting about applying shellac like this is you give pretty broad coverage, knowing that when you hit it with fire, it will run away from the flame and reveal a lot of that beautiful baby blue or that robin's egg blue below. So you almost over cover, knowing that a lot of it will go away into that lacy pattern. And so you can also paint over this later with encaustic medium. You just want to make sure that it's been fused well. And you don't have to fuse all of it. You can leave some of it, you can fuse some of it. The key is just to have fun, try stuff. And this is something you'd want to try on a smaller 10 or 11-inch piece beforehand. And so once this is applied pretty well with good coverage, we'll let it sit, and then I'll come back and give you just a short demo in this video on how I hit it with a blowtorch. Again, that's the Iwatani in my right hand, and that's the Bernzomatic self-igniting torch in my left hand. Just giving a little background on how they both burn. The blue one tends to have a more focused flame, and it's probably a little bit better for shellac, but I use both, honestly. So the flame is really low here in the demo, and I'm just taking my time. Some areas I'll go back and hit, but I like to think of the flame as almost lifting the edge of where the shellac starts. It's harder to see the white areas, I know, but as you can see, we're getting those wide open reticulated cells. Someone that I did some teaching and coaching for that person's also a physician, and they said that the term for that is reticulated, so I lifted their term. I think it's kind of cool. It's an unusual combination of, I think, medicine and doing encaustic, but it seemed like they were really into it, which is great, and that's all that matters, right? So it's starting to get more interesting visually here, taking my time. And you don't want to be in a rush. You can always scrape out areas that you think are too saturated with color. I always wear gloves. I'm standing on a stool in this because I like to be above the piece. Gives me just a little bit more of a good view, and probably a little bit more of a control to open up the cells in the way that I want. See how that blue's coming through with that lacy pattern? Isn't that magical? Looks like I switched torches there for a little while to cover more area. But the idea with this piece as a contemporary seascape is it's kind of the darker areas that you see are representing in some ways kind of landmass, and then it's the ocean, tide pools, and shoreline. It's the effect I was after. It's so satisfying. I will warn you, if you haven't done this, you'll be addicted, either doing it yourself or watching it. It's so cool. I love it. And I usually just listen to stuff in studio, maybe a podcast, good music, jazz, Fleetwood Mac, you name it, playlists. Isn't this piece starting to really come together? And that then sets up a really interesting underlayer with a lacy pattern that you can go over with clear, you can go over with other color. This is what makes many layered encaustic art interesting, to be sure. So now I'm going to augment with some more color, kind of that baby blue coming back in, adding it. It just really makes a cool, interesting, visually many layered waxy piece. This piece ended up going to California. I was commissioned by a younger couple. They'd never commissioned artwork before, so I was really honored. They have a place down in Manhattan Beach outside of LA. we're just coming to the end of this video. There's another example of what those cells look like with a nice, consistent, slow touch. It's revealing that gorgeous ultramarine blue below.